Tar Baby, Cassette 2.
Chapter 2. A house of sleeping humans is both closed and wide open. Like an ear, it resists easy penetration, but cannot brace for attack. Luckily, in the Caribbean there is no fear. The unsocketed eye that watches sleepers is not threatening. It is merely alert, which anyone can tell, for it has no lid and cannot wax or wane. No one speaks of a quarter or half-moon in the Caribbean. It is always full, always adrift and curious, unastonished but never bored by the things it beholds. A pair of married servants sleeping back to back, the man without pajama tops in deference to the heat, his wife up to her neck in percale to defy it. There is safety in those backs. Each one feels it radiating from the other, knows that the steady, able spine of its partner is a hip turn away. Then their sleep is tranquil, earned, unlike the sleep of the old man upstairs in cotton pajamas. He is napped so frequently in his greenhouse during the day that night sleep eludes him. Sometimes he needs a half balloon of brandy to find it, and even then he chats the night away, whispering first to his wrist, then to the ceiling the messages he has received that need telling. And when he has got it straight, the exact wording, even the spelling of the crucial words, he is happy and laughs lightly like a sweet boy. His wife, in another room, has carefully climbed the steps to sleep and arrived at its door with luggage packed and locked. Buffered nails, lightly oiled skin, hair pinned, teeth brushed, all her tips in shining order. Her breathing is still rapid, for she has just done 12 minutes of Canadian Air Force exercises. Eventually it slows, and under her sleeping mask, 2 cotton balls soaked in witch hazel nestle against peaceful eyelids. She is hopeful in sleep, for this may be the night she will dream the dream she ought to. Next to her bedroom, adjacent to it with a connecting door, she is not in this house year-round, and has chosen a guest room rather than the master bedroom as her own. A young woman, barely 25 years old, is wide awake. Again. She fell asleep immediately when first she lay down, but after an hour she woke rigid and frightened from a dream of large hats. Large, beautiful women's hats, like Norma Shearer's and Mae West's and Jeanette MacDonald's, although the dreamer is too young to have seen their movies or remembered them if she had. Feathers, veils, flowers, brims flat, brims drooping, brims folded and rounded. Hat after lovely sailing hat surrounding her until she is finger-snapped awake. She lay there, under the eye of the moon, wondering why the hats had shamed and repelled her so. As soon as she gave up looking for the center of the fear, she was reminded of another picture that was not a dream. 2 months ago, in Paris, the day she went grocery shopping. One of the happiest days of her life, full of such good weather and such good news, she decided to throw a party to celebrate. She telephoned all the people she loved, and some she did not, and then drove all the way to the supermarket in the 19e arrondissement. Everything on her list was sure to be there, and no substitutes or compromises were necessary. Major Gray's chutney, real brown rice, fresh pimento, tamarind rinds, coconut, and the split breasts of 2 young lambs. There were Chinese mushrooms and arugula, palm hearts, and Bertolli's Tuscany olive oil. If you had just been chosen for the cover of Elle, and there were 3 gorgeous and raucous men to telephone you, or screech up to your door in Yugoslavian touring cars with Bordeaux Blanc and sandwiches and a little C, and when you have a letter from a charming old man saying your orals were satisfactory to the committee, well, then you go to the supermarket for your dinner ingredients and plan a rich and tacky menu of dishes Easterners thought up for Westerners in order to indispose them. but which were printed in Vogue and Elle in a manner impressive to a 25-year-old, who could look so much younger when she chose that she didn't even have to lie to the agencies, and they gave what they believed was a 19-year-old face the eyes and mouth of a woman of 3 decades. Under such benevolent circumstances, knowing she was intelligent and lucky, everything on her list would, of course, be there. And when the vision materialized, in a yellow dress, Jadine was not sure it was not all part of her list, in addition to the coconut and tamarind, a kind of plus to go with the limes and pimento, another piece of her luck. The vision itself was a woman much too tall. Under her long canary yellow dress, Jadine knew there was too much hip, too much bust. The agency would laugh her out of the lobby. So why was she and everybody else in the store transfixed? The height? The skin like tar against the canary yellow dress? The woman walked down the aisle as though her many-colored sandals were pressing gold tracks on the floor. 2 upside-down V's were scored into each of her cheeks. Her hair was wrapped in a gele, as yellow as her dress. The people in the aisles watched her without embarrassment, with full glances instead of sly ones. She had no arm basket or cart, just her many-colored sandals and her yellow robe. Jadine turned her cart around and went back down the aisle, telling herself she wanted to re-examine the vegetables. The woman leaned into the dairy section and opened a carton from which she selected 3 eggs. Then she put her right elbow into the palm of her left hand and held the eggs aloft between earlobe and shoulder. She looked up then, and they saw something in her eyes so powerful it had burnt away the eyelashes. She strolled along the aisle, eggs on high, to the cashier, who tried to tell her the eggs were sold by the dozen or half-dozen, not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But she had to look up into those eyes too beautiful for lashes to say it. She swallowed, and was about to try again, when the woman reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and put a 10 louis piece on the counter and walked away. Away, gold tracking the floor and leaving them all behind. Left arm folded over her waist, right hand holding 3 chalk-white eggs in the air. And what will she do with her hands when she reaches the door, they wondered. Take her elbow out of the palm of her hand and push it open, turn around and ask for a paper bag, drop the eggs in a pocket? Each one of them begged in his heart that it would not happen, that she would float through the glass the way a vision should. She did, of course, and they needn't have worried. The door always opened when you stepped on the mat before it. But they had forgotten that, or had taken it for granted so long, they had not really seen it until that woman approached it with the confidence of transcendent beauty, and it flew open in silent obedience. She would deny it now, but, along with everybody else in the market, Jadine gasped. Just a little. Just a sudden intake of air. Just a quick snatch of breath before that woman's woman, that mother-sister she, that unphotographable beauty, took it all away. Jadine followed her profile, then her back, as she passed the store window, followed her all the way to the edge of the world where the plate glass stopped. And there, just there, a moment before the cataclysm when all loveliness and life and breath in the world was about to disappear, the woman turned her head sharply around to the left and looked right at Jadine, turned those eyes too beautiful for eyelashes on Jadine, and with a small parting of her lips, shot an arrow of saliva between her teeth down to the pavement and the hearts below. Actually, it didn't matter. When you have fallen in love, rage is superfluous, insult impossible. You mumble, bitch, but the hunger never moves, never closes. It is placed, open and always ready for another canary yellow dress. Other tar-black fingers holding 3 white eggs, or eyes whose force has burnt away their lashes. Jadine's luck continued. The dinner party was memorable, and nowhere had anything begun to spoil. Like the arugula leaf, life was green and nicely curved. Nothing was limp. There were no tears or brown spots. The items on her shopping list were always there. The handsome, raucous men wanted to marry, live with, support, fund, and promote her. Smart and beautiful women wanted to be her friend, confidant, lover, neighbor, guest, playmate, host, servant, student, or simply near. A lucky girl. Why leave the show? Cable to old relatives. Write a cheery request-type, offer-type letter to a rich old pushover and split to Dominique on whatever Air France had to offer when everything on her shopping list was right there in Paris. Nothing was absent. Not even the spit of an African woman whose eyes had burnt away their lashes. Jadine slipped out of bed and went to the window. She knelt on the floor and, folding her arms on the sill, rested her head on the pane. She lifted the back of her hand to her mouth and squeezed the soft flesh with her teeth. She couldn't figure out why the woman's insulting gesture had derailed her, shaken her out of proportion to incident. Why she had wanted that woman to like and respect her. It had certainly taken the zing out of the magazine cover as well as her degree. Beyond the window, etched against the light of a blazing moon, she could see the hills on the other side of the island, where 100 horsemen rode 100 horses, so Valerian said. That was how the island got its name. He had pointed the 3 humps of hills out to her, but Margaret, who had accompanied them on the tour of the grounds when Jadine first arrived, said no such thing. 1 rider, just one. Therefore, Ile de le Chevalier. 1 French soldier on a horse, not 100. She'd gotten the story from a neighbor, the first family Valerian had sold to. Valerian stuck to his own story, which he preferred, and felt was more accurate, because he had heard it from Dr. Michelin, who lived in town and knew all about it. They're still there, he said, and you can see them if you go over there at night. But I don't suppose we'll ever meet. If they've been riding for as long as the story is old, they must be as tired as I am, and I don't want to meet anybody older or more tired than I am. Maybe they're not old, Jadine thought, staring out the window. Maybe they're still young, still riding, 100 men on 100 horses. She tried to visualize them, wave after wave of chevaliers. But somehow that made her think of the woman in yellow, who had run her out of Paris. She crawled back into bed and tried to fix the feeling that had troubled her. The woman had made her feel lonely in a way, lonely and inauthentic. Perhaps she was overreacting. The woman appeared simply at a time when she had a major decision to make. Of the 3 raucous men, the one she most wanted to marry and who was desperate to marry her was exciting and smart and fun and sexy, so I guess the person I want to marry is him, but I wonder if the person he wants to marry is me or a black girl. And if it isn't me he wants, but any black girl who looks like me, talks and acts like me, what will happen when he finds out that I hate ear hoops, that I don't have to straighten my hair, that Mingus puts me to sleep, that sometimes I want to get out of my skin and be only the person inside, not American, not black, just me. Suppose he sleeps with somebody else after we're married. Will I feel the way I did when he took Nina Fong away for the weekend? He was amazed, he said, at my reaction. Weren't we always to be honest with each other? He didn't want a relationship with lies, did I? And then we made up, set the date. No wedding, just a marriage. He got rid of his old mattress and bought a new one for us to grow old on, he said. Then the magazine cover, and then her degree assured, and then the woman in yellow. And then she had run away because Rick is white and the woman spat at her, and she had to come to see her aunt and uncle to see what they would feel, think, say. White but European, which was not as bad as white and American, they would understand that. Or would they? Had they ever said? They liked her being in Paris. The school she'd gone to, the friends she'd had there. They were always boasting about it. And it was not like she needed their views on anything. After her mother died, they were her people, but she never lived with them except summers at Valerian's house when she was very young. Less, and then never after college. They were family. They had gotten Valerian to pay her tuition, while they sent her the rest, having no one else to spend it on. Jadine and Sydney mattered a lot to her, but what they thought did not. She had sought them out to touch bases, to sort out things before going ahead with anything. So far, she had been playful with them, had not said anything definite about her plans. When they asked her, was she serious about this Rick fellow who telephoned and who sent letters every week, she pretended it was nothing, that she was thinking of going back to Paris only to get her things. There was a small assignment in New York. She would take it, and then she wanted to see about opening a business of her own. She'd told them a gallery, or a boutique, or a... She'd looked at their faces then. Well, something they could all do together, so they could live together like a family at last. They smiled generously, but their eyes made her know they were happy to play store with her. But nothing would pull them away from the jobs they had had for 30 years or more. Jadine kicked off the sheet and buried her head under the pillow to keep the moonlight out of her eyes and the woman in yellow out of her mind. When Jadine had gotten out of bed to stare at the hills, Valerian woke up. He had finished chatting to the ceiling and into his wrist the exact spelling of the message. These ice boxes are brown, broken, perspective, VIOLIAX is something more and can't be coal note. He had sipped the brandy rather quickly, annoyed by the day's turn of events, and had lain for a while thinking how impossible it was that, unlike other men, he had been pushed into a presidency but had to fight for his retirement. When he was 39, he swore that he would quit at exactly 65, before he started spending his days traveling from the executive toilet back to his desk, where the ballpoint pens mounted on marble had gone dry and his pencils were always long and sharp, that he would never permit himself to become the industrial nuisances his uncles had, stubborn, meddlesome, hanging onto their desks with their fingernails, flourishing once or twice a year, when a crisis occurred with an old client, or a new FDA official that needed their familiarity or style or some other antiquated company charm. His uncles had been good to him. Their mother, Valerian's grandmother, had 4 sons, each of whom had married a woman who had only girls, except Valerian's mother, who delivered 1 girl and 1 boy, who was the future of the family. When his father died, and Valerian was 7, the uncles gathered to steady everybody and to take over the education of their dead brother's sons, since it was, they said, self-understood that he would inherit the candy factory. And just to show how much they loved and anticipated him, they named a candy after him, Valerian's, red and white gumdrops in a red and white box, mint-flavored, the white ones, strawberry-flavored, the red. Valerian's turned out to be a slow but real flop. although not a painful one financially, for it was made from the syrup sludge left over from their main confection, Teddy Boys. "What's the matter with them?" asked the uncles. "Faggoty," said the sales reps. "Faggoty?" "Yeah, like Valentine's. Can you see a kid sitting on a curb tossing those fairy candies in his mouth? Seasonal is all we can do. Valentine's Day. Give us something with nuts, why don't you?" Nobody in the East or Midwest touched them. They sat in movie house display cases and on candy store shelves until they were hard as marbles and stuck together like grapes. "But somebody's buying them," the uncle said. "Jigs," said the salesman. "Jigs buy 'em. Maryland, Florida, Mississippi. Close the line. Nobody can make $1 selling faggoty candy to Jigs." "But when they move north, don't they ask for what they got in Mississippi?" "Hell no! They leave in the South. When they move out, they want to leave that stuff behind. They don't want to be reminded. Alaga syrup is dead in New York. So is gold dust soap, and so are Valerians. Close it out." But they didn't close it out. Not right away, at least. The uncles let the item sell itself in the South until the sugar shortage of the early 40s. And even then they fought endlessly to keep it on. They went to the bathroom, to lunch, read food industry literature, and held caucuses among themselves about whether to manufacture a nickel box of Valerians in Mississippi, where beet sugar was almost free, and the labor too. "Ooh, Valerian," said the box. And that was all. Not even a picture of the candy, or a happy face eating it. Valerian appreciated their efforts, but recognized them as sentimental and not professional, and swore again he would retire exactly at 65, if not before, and would not let his ownership position keep him there, making an ass of himself. After all, he was the first partner with a college education and a love of other things. And it was because of these other things, music, books, that all the way through a 9-year childless marriage to a woman who disliked him, all the way through a hateful, shoddy, interminable divorce, all the way into and out of the military service, he could be firm. After the war, he went to a convention of industrial food appliance sales in Maine and stepped out for a breath of winter air. There, on a float, with the polar bear, he saw Miss Maine. She was so young and so unexpectedly pretty, he swallowed air and had a coughing fit. She was all red and white, like the Valerians. So already, at 39, he was showing signs of the same sentimentality his uncles had. It made his resolve even firmer. Out of respect for the company, the industry, he would do what they required the Swedes and Germans who worked for them to do, retire at 65. After all, it was a family shop. They had taken a little bit of sugar and a little bit of cocoa and made a good living for themselves and 90 others, and the people who lived in the factory's neighborhood stayed there and loved it there largely because of the marvelous candy odor that greeted them in the morning and bid them good night. Smelling it was almost like having it, and they could have it too, way back then, because damaged lots of Teddy Boys were regularly given to children and homeless men. And when the homeless men found themselves on a train in Oregon or a camp in Boulder, Colorado, they remembered the delicious smell of Philadelphia with far more pleasure than they remembered its women. The childhood of the children growing up in that candy air never quite left, and may have been why they never quite grew up. They moved to Dallas and Altoona and listened to other people's stories of childhood politely but without envy. They seldom tried to describe their own because how could you make another person know what it was like? All you could say was, "There was a candy factory in our neighborhood and it smelled so good." So they kept it to themselves and kept their childhood longer than they should have in Dallas and Altoona and Newport News. And the Street Brothers Candy Company never left the neighborhood or forgot the workers. It expanded, but right on the block and behind the original building. They hired more salesmen, and even when they bought machines to do what the Swedish and German women had done, they kept them on in other capacities, although it was clear they had no need for them, out of respect for Grandmother Stadt, and out of respect for the industry. They had 6 good items by the time Valerian took over, and all the women were dead, but not the uncles, and it was because of this same respect for the industry and its legendary place in the neighborhood and the hearts of those who lived there that he was determined to retire at 65, before he got foolish. He married Miss Maine, and when she had a baby boy, he was as relieved as the uncles, but resisted the temptation to introduce a new confection named after his son. By that time, they had reduced the size of the Teddy boys' hats, which nobody connected anymore to Theodore Roosevelt, an era his uncles encouraged, since the candy had been made first by their workaholic mother as a treat for Theodore, her youngest son, and later on to sell for pin money. Hers were big, chocolatey things, like gingerbread boys, but when they went into business, they were much smaller. Now, you couldn't even see the Teddy boys' buttons. Through it all, Valerian never swerved from his 65 timetable. He prepared for it, bought an island in the Caribbean for almost nothing, built a house on a hill away from the mosquitoes, and vacationed there when he could, and when his wife did not throw a fit to go elsewhere. Over the years, he sold off parts of it, provided the parcels were large and the buyers discreet, but he kept his distance and his dream of getting out of the way at 65 and letting his son take over. But the son was not charmed by Teddy boys or island retreats. Valerian's disappointment was real, so he agreed to the company's sale to one of the candy giants who could and did triple the volume in 2 years. Valerian turned his attention to refining the house, the grounds, mail service to the island, measuring French colonial taxes against American residential ones, killing off rats, snakes, and other destructive animal life, adjusting the terrain for comfortable living. When he knew for certain that Michael would always be a stranger to him, he built the greenhouse as a place of controlled, ever-flowering life to greet death in. It seemed a simple, modest enough wish to him, normal, decent, like his life, fair, generous, like his life. Nobody except Sidney and Undine seemed to understand that. He had never abused himself, but he thought keeping fit inelegant somehow and vain. His claims to decency were human. He had never cheated anybody, had done the better thing whenever he had a choice, and sometimes when he did not. He had never been miserly or a spendthrift, and his politics were always rational and often humane. He had played his share of tennis and golf, but it was more for business reasons than pleasure. He'd had countless discussions with friends and clients about the house he was building in the Caribbean, about land value, tax credit, architects, designers, space, line, color, breeze, tamarind trees, hurricanes, cocoa, banana, and fleur de fuego. There had been 2 or 3 girls who had helped him enter the 50s. Lovely, lovely. Nothing to worry Margaret, had she known. Merely life preservers in the post-50 ocean, helping him make it to shore. There was a moment during the war when he thought some great event was in store for him, but it never happened. He was never sent with the message the world was waiting for. He knew the message was not his, that he had not thought it up, but he believed he was worthy of delivering it. Nothing of the sort befell him, so he returned to civilian life, a bachelor, intact. Until he saw Miss Maine, whom a newspaper published by the envious grandfather of a runner-up called A Principal Beauty of Maine, looking like the candy that had his name. His youth lay in her red whiteness, a snowy Valentine Valerian, and Bride of Polar Bear became his bride. The disgust of the aunts at his marriage to a teenager from a family of nobodies dissolved with the almost immediate birth of his son. Valerian didn't need a youth then. The boy was that. Now the boy was a grown man, but perpetually childlike. So Valerian wanted his own youth again, and a place to spend it. His was taken from him when his father died, and his mother and his aunts all changed from hearty, fun-loving big sisters to grave, serioso mamas, who began their duties by trying to keep him from grieving over his father's death. Luckily, a drunken woman did their laundry. And although he stayed on 1 year past 65 to make some changes, and another year past that to make sure the changes held, he did manage to retire at 68, to l'arbre de la croix, and sleep the deep brandy sleep he deserved. Margaret was not dreaming, nor was she quite asleep, although the moon looking at her face believed she was. She was experiencing the thing insomniacs dread, not being awake, but the ticky-tacky thoughts that fill in the spaces where sleep ought to be. Rags and swatches, drain cloths and crumpled paper napkins, old griefs and embarrassments, jealousies and offense, just common ignoble scraps, not deep enough for dreaming and not light enough to dismiss. Yet she was hopeful that sleep would come, that she would have the dream she ought to, for maybe that would dispel the occasional forgetfulness that plagued her when she forgot the names and uses of things. It happened mostly at meals, and once, years ago, with the prince's telephone, which she picked up with her car keys and address book and tried to stuff in her purse. They were rare moments, but dark and windy enough to last. After lunch with friends, you could go to the powder room, twist the lipstick out of its tube, and wonder suddenly if it was for licking or writing your name. And because you never knew when it would come back, a thin terror accompanied you always, except in sleep. So there was peace and hope on the face of this beautiful woman, born to two ordinary-looking people, Joseph and Leonora Lordy, who had looked at their beautiful red-headed child with shock and amazement. Of course, there was no thought of adultery. Leonora was 60 before she showed the world her two bare legs. But the hair bothered Joe, caught his eye at the dinner table, and ruined his meals. He looked at little Margaret's skin, as delicate as the shell of a robin's egg, and almost as blue, and stroked his thumb. Leonora shrugged and covered her head with lace older than Maine itself. She was as puzzled as her husband, but not as alarmed, although it did look funny at the 9:30 Mass. Margaret's head glowing like an ember among the cold, dark heads of her other children. She couldn't explain it, and didn't try. But Joe never left off stroking his thumb and staring at his little girl's blue, if it's a boy, blue eyes. He stroked his thumb and stroked his thumb until he smashed his temple with his fist, having just remembered Buffalo. The Buffalo great-aunts, Celestina and Alicia, twins with hair the color of saffron and the white skin of the North. He roared and began to tell people about his Buffalo aunts, whom he had not seen since he was 6. And although his brothers shouted, "Yeah, yeah," when he reminded them, he thought he saw doubt in the eyes of his friends. Thus began a series of letters to Buffalo inviting the twins to South Suzanne. They were flattered by his letters, but couldn't understand the sudden affection from a great-nephew they didn't remember. For a year, they declined to pay a visit on account of advanced age, until Joe offered to pay their bus fare. "Where?" asked Leonora. "Where will they sleep?" And Joe touched his fingers. Adolphe, Campi, Estella, Cesare, Nick, Nunzio, Michelina, or any of the other Lordes scattered around the county. Leonora looked at the ceiling, covered her head with lace older than Maine itself, and went to Mass to beg for sanity, Madre de Dio, if not peace, in her house. The aunts came, and when Joe picked them up at the bus station and saw that the saffron had turned to garlic, he smashed his temple again. It turned out better than nothing, however, for he was able to regale them in the presence of company about their losing their flaming hair, and they smiled and acknowledged that it had certainly been lost, which was proof enough for everyone that such hair and such skin had existed at one time, and therefore could legitimately reappear 4 generations later on the tiny head of Margaret Lenore. Still, it left its mark on her, being that pretty with that coloring. Joe and Leonora left her alone after the Buffalo aunts went home. Maybe her beauty scared them a little. Maybe they just felt, well, at least she has that. She won't have to worry. And they stepped back and let her be. They gave her care, but they withdrew attention. Their strength they gave to the others who were not beautiful. Their knowledge, what information they had, they did not give to this single beautiful one. They saved it, distributed it instead to those whose characters had to be built. The rest of their energies they used on the problems of surviving in a county that didn't want them there. During the months when the earth permitted it, Joe and his brothers dug a hole in the ground. They cinder-blocked it, topped it, and put in a toilet and a gas line. Little by little, the Lourdes moved out of their trailer across the yard into the cinder-block basement. They lived huddled and quite warm there, considering what Maine winters were like. Then Joe started the first-floor walls, and by 1935 all 6 of them were in a 7-room house the Lordy brothers had built with their own hands. Leonora rented the trailer, but kept its backyard for peppers, corn, fat squash, and the columbine she loved beyond reason. But Margaret always loved the trailer best, for there the separateness she felt had less room to grow in. In the hand-built house, and later in the big brick house on Chester Street, after her father and uncles bought 2 trucks and began Lordy Brothers, the loneliness was only partially the look in the eyes of the uncles and the nuns. Much of it was the inaccessibility of the minds, not the hearts, of Leonora and Joseph Lordy. So, when she got married 8 months out of high school, she didn't have to leave home. She was already gone. She didn't have to leave them. They had already left her. And other than money gifts to them and brief telephone calls, she was still gone. It was always like that. She was gone, and other people were where they belonged. She was going up or downstairs. Other people seemed to be settled somewhere. She was on the 2 concrete steps of the trailer, the 6 wooden steps of the hand-built house, the 37 steps at the stadium when she was crowned, and the 1,000,000 wide steps in the house of Valerian Street. It was just her luck to fall in love with and marry a man who had a house bigger than her elementary school, a house of 3 stories, with pearl gray S's everywhere, on cups, saucers, glasses, silverware, and even in their bed. When she and Valerian lay snug in bed, facing each other and touching toes, the pearl gray S on the sheet hems and pillow slips coiled at her, and she stiffened like Joan Fontaine and Rebecca until she learned from her husband that his ex-wife had nothing to do with it. His grandmother had had some of the monograms done, and his mother the rest. Margaret's relief was solid, but it did nothing to keep her from feeling drowned when he was not there in the spaciousness of that house, with only a colored couple with unfriendly faces to save her. Alone in the house, peeping into a room, it looked all right, but the minute she turned her back, she heard the after-boom. And who could she tell that to? Not the coloreds. She was 17, and couldn't even give them orders the way she was supposed to. It must be like room service, she thought, and she asked them to bring her things, and they did. But when she said thank you and sipped the Coca-Cola, they smiled a private smile she hated. The woman, Undine, cooked and did the cleaning. The man, too. And he also had morning chats with Valerian, brushed his clothes, sent some of the laundry, some to the cleaners. Some disappeared altogether. There was nothing in that line for her to do but amuse herself. In solitude, and awful as that was, the dinners with Valerian's friends were worse. There, men talked about music and money and the Marshall Plan. She knew nothing about any of it, but she was never stupid enough to pretend she did, and tried to enter the conversation. The wives talked around the edges of such matters, or dropped amusing bits into the conversations, like the green specks in cannoli filling. Once, a wife whom she showed to the downstairs powder room asked her where she had gone to school, and she said South Suzanne. "Where's that?" asked the woman. "South Suzanne High School," said Margaret. The woman gave her a wide, generous grin for a long time, then patted Margaret's stomach. "Get to work fast, sweetheart."
This ends side 1 of cassette 2. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.